All right. Hello, everybody. This is the third review I'm recording today, but they will all be coming out on separate days. So now it had been quite some time since I'd seen the movie that we're going to be talking about today, Titanic. Now, I don't think I'd seen this since I was a kid, probably around the age of like somewhere between 10 and 12, probably. And I will just say that I didn't really know, obviously, know much about the story back then as I do now. And obviously, this movie hit a little harder emotionally for me now, knowing more of the story and kind of seeing the true tragedy of what happened to the Titanic. Now, I know there's been several theories on what the actual ship was that left and so on and so forth, and maybe some of that is true. I don't really know. But either way, whatever ship sank out there, it's still just as tragic whether it was the actual Titanic or somehow they were able to switch the ships, right? Doesn't make the story any less tragic than it actually was. Now, I had forgotten quite a bit of what was in this movie, especially near the beginning when they're actually going down and exploring the Titanic, looking for this jewel called, what was it, the Eye of the Ocean, I think, or the Eye of the Sea or something like that. So, now the girl that Kate Winslet was betraying, so Rose DeWitt Bukater, I guess she was of like some sort of wealthy family because obviously she was in first class and she was supposed to be marrying this guy named Col Hockley, and then Jack Dawson kind of gets in the way of that. Frances Fisher was the one that played the older Ruth DeWitt Bukater. Okay. Oh no, that was the mother. Okay. Oh, Rose, right. Gloria Stewart was the one who played the old Rose. Oh, Bill Paxton, that's who that was Brock Lovett, who was the main guy, who was, I guess, running the expedition on the actual Titanic, trying to find this jewel, right? So yeah, they get a phone call from Rose, who claims to be the woman in one of the drawings that they found on board. Now, when they talk about it, Rose would have been, I guess, 17 when she was aboard the Titanic. So, judging by that, they're saying that she would have been dead, or she would have been 101 years old, because this movie was filmed in 1997, so let's just do the math there, if they were actually going by the proper years. So, 1997 minus, it was 1912 when the Titanic sank, so she would have only been, oh, but she was 17, right, already in 1912. So, let's just see, 1912 minus 17. Oh, so she was born in 1895. So, let's just see, 1997 minus 1895 equals, yeah, so she would have been 102. That's crazy. That's a crazy lifespan. It's not impossible, but I guess nowadays it might seem a little more wild than, yeah, it did back then. So she would have been 101, probably going on 102, I would imagine. And she was, like, for being that age in this film, obviously she was looking pretty good for 101. Now, when did I wonder if the actual actress passed away. Oh yeah, she did in 2010. Oh, so she was, oh wow, she actually made it to 100 in real life too. That's crazy. That's pretty cool, actually. Wow, okay. And then who played the mother? Because she was born in 1952, so she's still around. Interesting. So it kind of seems weird. I guess that's just the way it was back then in the early 1900s, I suppose. It kind of seemed like arranged marriages were still sort of a popular thing, I guess. obviously, Rose doesn't want any part of this, right? She wants to be happy with whoever she can be, and she kind of finds that in Jack. So Leonardo DiCaprio played Jack, Kate Winslet played Rose, Billy Zane played Cal, Kathy Bates played Molly, who was among the rich people, but they all kind of sort of silently exiled her because she was, I guess they didn't like her because she was a little different from the rest of them. I don't really understand that, but Bernard Hill played Captain Smith. Victor Garber played Thomas Andrews, who was the one that built the ship. He was Irish. Jonathan Hyde played Bruce Ismay. I believe he was the one who was kind of telling the ship basically what to do because he wanted all this press on it or whatever, right? Which, I mean, if they hadn't been going as fast as they were, they might have actually been able to avoid crashing into the iceberg. Now, I'm not entirely sure. There's a theory that if they had hit it head on, it wouldn't have done as much damage as it did and probably ripped like the hull of the ship or whatever and let all the water in, right? Like, I feel like they probably could have survived being maybe stuck in the iceberg, I suppose. And maybe help could have actually came and found them. I'm not entirely sure. But, yeah, I didn't know she was only supposed to be 17 in this movie. I guess, wow, that's kind of crazy. But I suppose Leonardo DiCaprio's character would have been around the same age anyway, I guess. So, yeah, where is a picture of Jonathan Hyde in this movie? Good grief. No, I don't want a trailer. I just want to see all images. You'd think he would be in here somewhere, Jonathan Hyde's character. There's a lot of images for this movie. Maybe he's down here somewhere. I'm not seeing him. That's weird. Because it's not like he had a small part in this movie. If that's... Oh, there he is, right there. Standing beside the captain. Oh, okay. So yeah, Jonathan Hyde was the one that was basically telling the captain what to do. Not entirely, but he kind of, I guess, had control of what exactly, like how fast they were going to make it to their destination and so on and so forth. And then we had like the officers on the ship. Ewan Stewart played Officer Murdoch. Ian Grufford played Officer Lowe. Jonathan Phillips played Officer Lightower. Mark Lindsay, Officer Wilde. Wow, there was just a lot of people in this movie. Crazy. So one of the officers, when they're trying to get the lifeboats, ends up actually shooting two people and then killing himself because he realizes that what he's done. And I know that they were obviously trying to get women and children off of the ship first, and some of the lifeboats weren't even loaded with enough people, and it was just kind of causing more chaos and panic than I think was really necessary. Now, when they loaded up the ship with lifeboats, they told them that they didn't need it. They didn't need all the lifeboats because the ship was unsinkable, which was not the case at all. And I guess the icebergs were obviously harder to see with the water being not so choppy. And they didn't see the iceberg in time, right? That's what happened. They just didn't see it in time, and they weren't able to turn quick enough to stop the ship from hitting it. Now, I think possibly it would have been better for them just to hit it head on, and maybe they could have possibly split it. I'm not really sure. Or maybe just slowed down. Now, I know obviously that's what they were trying to do regardless of what happened anyway. But it was just wild that, like, how this story went. So this is basically the story of Titanic through Rose's eyes. Now, I don't know how much truth there is to her actual story. Whether this was actually based on true events of somebody who went through this. I don't know whether this was written or not. I'd actually have to look up whether either of these were a real person. Now, obviously, at the end of the movie, they say there is no record of this Jack because he died, right? And she never mentioned him even to her own husband. or anybody else. So all these years she's been holding in this story, which is crazy to have to hold it in that long. Like, it was, what, 84 years between the time of the Titanic and when they found this photo or drawing of her. So it seems wild that she's been holding in that story for that long. Now, there obviously was the love story aspect of this movie, but that I don't think that takes away from what happened on the actual Titanic, like the captain going down with the ship. Obviously, some of the braver souls, even some of the women and kids stayed behind on the ship and went down with the ship. So there were a lot of brave people that decided that's what they were going to do and let other people go on, which I think is a very selfless act, especially in that sort of high intensity situation. Like, you've really got to know that that's your choice and you're happy with that, because that seems wild. Now, there were a few people that I feel were a little bit cowardly and obviously hopped on to lifeboats or found loopholes, tried to bribe the officers, so on and so forth. It was just crazy, and they were trying to keep the lower class people in the lower levels till all the richer people got on the boats and left, which is also a very wild concept. Like, it shouldn't be that way. It should just be anybody who can get in a lifeboat that you can save and you can pack the lifeboat, pack it. And honestly, they should have brought enough lifeboats to get everybody off that ship, because there was 2,000 some passengers, I believe, and they didn't have enough lifeboats for everybody. Like, that should have been something that was a given, regardless of who told who what. Right? Kind of seems like a crazy thing that they wouldn't have the proper safety measures in place for such a long voyage too, right? It just doesn't make sense. So basically what happened was the front of the ship, they explained a little bit. The front of the ship starts to fill with water. It was already in the fourth cabin. Now, the ship was meant to take on water in the first three, I think. But once it reaches the fourth, it's already too late. It'll just keep going to the fifth, sixth, seventh kind of thing, and the ship will just slowly start to sink. So eventually the ship couldn't handle the weight of itself going down, and it just snapped in two, which is kind of crazy as well. Especially that scene. I'm not afraid to admit I actually cried during the movie this time, because again, it's quite an impactful story. And yeah, it's just, you're not really thinking about it as much when you're a kid, right? But now as an adult and knowing a little bit more about what happened, and obviously the amount of people that could have been saved and weren't and had to die in the freezing water is just a wild thing too, because the lifeboats could have easily turned around a lot quicker in order to save people, but I feel like some of them just continued on and didn't care. And only one lifeboat went back, and I think Rose said 1,500 people. Was it 1,500 people that ended up dying? So not that many people made it out on the lifeboats. Only about 1,000, I would say, because I think they said 2,500 was the full amount of people that were on the ship. So only 1,000 ended up making it on the lifeboats, and over 1,000 people ended up dying in the water, or falling through the ship, or drowning in the ship, or so on and so forth, kind of thing. So yeah, just absolutely crazy. And even Billy Zane's character trying to kill the two of them at the end of the movie, and realizing that he had left the jewel in his coat pocket, and he had given the jewel to Rose. So when Rose ends up making it home, because she's one of the 6 people that were saved on the lifeboat that came back, she ends up just keeping the jewel all this time, and obviously that's what they're looking for when they're trying to dig through the Titanic, and she just ends up throwing it into the water at the end of the movie. And just like Jack said, they don't really go into it, but I assume that she died in her sleep peacefully, just like Jack said she would when she was an old woman. Unfortunately, Jack does pass away. He dies in the freezing water. Now, I know there's the age-old debate of could he have fit on the door, and I think they've proven that he could have, but I think the weight distribution probably would have maybe either tipped the door or something, because it kind of seems to me like Jack goes to get onto the door and then realizes that Rose is going to tip off with him, so he just says, stay on it and I'll stay in the water, sort of thing. And he tries to keep her calm and comforted the entire time. And luckily, she's able to get to a whistle to save her own life, because otherwise, without that, she didn't even have enough energy to scream because she was so cold, from even just being in that atmosphere, because they were in the North Atlantic, which would have been, yeah, pretty much freezing temperatures, obviously, if there's icebergs up there, right? So, yeah, they went through quite the adventure together. They fell in love on the ship. I think Rose kind of realized what kind of person she wanted to be, even though she was young, right? She didn't want to just be married to anybody. She wanted to be happy and in love, and she fell in love with Jack on the ship. And unfortunately, he passed away. But I feel like they would have been, they would have lived a very long, happy life together if he had been able to survive. So that was also sad to watch him have to die in the film as well, right? Because nobody will ever know if he was a real person or not, because there was no record of him, which is kind of sad. Because unfortunately, he got his ticket by winning a really good hand of poker. That's how he won his ticket onto the ship. It was supposed to be this guy named Sven and his friend that were on the ship, but they bet their tickets onto the Titanic, in a hand of poker. So it ended up being Jack and his buddy that got onto the ship. Now, I wouldn't say that was the luckiest hand of poker to win, probably, seeing as the circumstances where he ended up dying. But I mean, I guess he got to live. He said he had the best time meeting Rose, right? Like that was he's glad he got the ticket because he was able to meet her and fall in love. So I suppose he ended off his life on a high note, I guess. At least being able to experience that. I suppose the rest of the trip, besides obviously the sinking, would have been pretty extraordinary to him, because he didn't really have much. He was on the lower class of people right back then. So I suppose for him, being even able to get on the ship and experience what he had experienced would have been pretty surreal, regardless of the unfortunate circumstances of what happened, right? Yeah, some of these scenes were very hard to watch, like when the Titanic broke apart and then it started to tip back into the water, and you could see people falling and hitting the ship in certain ways, and it was just like, and people trying to jump and in a mass panic, and it was just wild to see that things weren't coordinated a little bit better, and they should have had the proper equipment on the ship, right? But I will say, I feel like this movie was done properly. James Cameron is a really good director, and the fact that this film still stands up 25 years later, like this is the 25th anniversary of the film, is pretty crazy, right? To have a film kind of stand the test of time like that, and it was cool to go see it in 4K and in 3D. I feel like that was kind of really an immersive experience. Now, I know sometimes they overdo it on the 3D. Sometimes it seems like certain movies don't really need it, but I feel like this one, it worked well. Yeah, it really did work well for what this movie was. Now, obviously, you could tell, some of the graphics wise, like it wasn't as good as it. Like if they remade the film with other actors and actresses, I feel like it would be crazy with the way CGI is today. But the fact that most of this still looks as real as it does, and the movie was made in 1997, I feel like that should kind of speak for itself. The fact that it still looks that realistic 25 years later. And what else can I really say about this movie? Yeah, there wasn't really anything bad about this movie. Like it's just a great movie. It'll be a classic for years, and I hope they kind of keep doing this with movies to bring it to a newer audience. So I feel like they should probably do like a 30-year anniversary, and then maybe like a 40-year anniversary. Every 5 years might get a little stale, but yeah, like keep doing it, because I will honestly probably go see this in theaters again if they do decide to do like a 30-year anniversary 5 years from now. I would gladly sit my butt in a movie theater seat to go see it again. And I will continue to do that if they keep doing it with the movies like this because they're just classics, right? Um, and I feel like they deserve to be seen on the big screen. So, yeah, 10 out of 10, obviously, for this movie. I feel like any lower of a rating for a movie like this, just the nostalgia factor of the movie, the telling of the story, the actual, like, even the love story and the telling of the sinking of the Titanic is just needs to be, yeah, it just needs to be a 10 out of 10. There's no other way around it. This movie is a 10 out of 10. It was that good. The acting was phenomenal. The acting still holds up today because I know a lot of the 90 movies were, they weren't this quality of acting, I can tell you that, growing up in the 90s. So, yeah, this movie was just definitely one of those standout movies in the 90s for sure. Uh, and I am looking forward to, obviously, James Cameron's um, future projects, clearly. Right? It is James Cameron, right? I did say that right. Yeah, okay. And knowing that he is a well, I guess not knowing, but obviously he's a fellow Canadian, so it's even cooler to see him doing well in the film industry because I know it's not, especially not easy um, these days when you have so many people trying to get into it, right? So it's crazy that he's still, his movies are still doing that well. Other than that, I guess I will see you guys in the next review. 10 out of 10 for this movie. I feel like that speaks for itself with just how iconic this movie was and how good it was and the fact that it still is standing the test of time and the acting and so on and so forth. Just, yeah. And the story and all the cool scenes of being able to travel to kind of like between timelines of like the present and the past was really cool. So, yeah, I will see you guys next review. Bye bye for now.